My name is Chloe. I'm 32 years old, and I discovered my sister had stolen my identity and taken out a $623,000 loan in my name when a foreclosure notice arrived for a mansion I'd never even seen. The letter was thick, official, and felt cold in my hands. The worst part wasn't the identity theft itself, as horrifying as that was. The worst part was sitting in my parents' pristine living room an hour later, the foreclosure notice laid out on the polished coffee table between us like a declaration of war, and watching them beg me to pay for it. "It's your duty as a sister," my mother said, her voice trembling with false concern. "You have to protect her." They had no idea that in asking me to sacrifice my future for my sister's crime, they had just handed me the motivation to dismantle their entire world. It all started on a Tuesday. I remember it was raining, a miserable gray drizzle that matched the exhaustion I felt after a 12-hour shift at the hospital. I'm a nurse. I spend my days taking care of people, trying to fix what's broken. It's a life of service, of giving, and it leaves me bone-tired but fulfilled. My apartment is small, but it's mine. Every piece of furniture, every bill paid, is a testament to my own hard work. So when I saw the envelope from a major mortgage corporation I'd never dealt with, I assumed it was junk mail, a pre-approved offer for a life I couldn't afford. I almost threw it away. But something made me stop. Maybe the stern, urgent official correspondence stamped in red ink. Inside my tiny kitchen, I tore it open. The words swam before my eyes. Notice of intent to foreclose. My name and social security number were at the top. Below that was an address in Northwood Heights, the wealthiest suburb in the state, a place where doctors and CEOs lived. And then there was the number, the one that made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush, a remaining principal balance of $623,114.82. The letter stated that the loan in my name was over 90 days delinquent. My mind refused to process it. This had to be a mistake, a clerical error, a very, very cruel prank. My first call was to the mortgage company. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. The customer service agent on the other end was polite but firm. He confirmed all the details. The loan was originated 18 months prior. Yes, it was under the name Chloe Ann Miller. Yes, they had my social security number, my date of birth, everything. "We have a signed copy of your driver's license in the file, ma'am," he said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. I felt a wave of nausea. I hadn't applied for a new driver's license in years. He mentioned the monthly payment, an amount that was more than double what I earned in a month. I hung up the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was only one person who had access to my documents, who knew my life inside and out, and who lived at that exact address in Northwood Heights. My sister, Amelia. I drove to my parents' house in a blind panic, the rain streaking down my windshield like tears. I needed my parents. I needed them to be shocked, to be furious on my behalf, to wrap their arms around me and tell me we would fight this together. I burst through their door without knocking, drenched and frantic, waving the letter like a white flag of surrender. They were in the living room, my father reading the paper, my mother arranging flowers, the picture of perfect domestic tranquility. "What is this?" I choked out, throwing the letter onto the table. "Amelia. She used my name. She bought her house in my name. The bank is going to foreclose. They think I owe them over $500,000. I waited for the explosion, the anger, the frantic phone call to Amelia. Instead, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. My mother's face went pale. She sank onto the sofa, her hand flying to her chest. My father folded his newspaper with deliberate, agonizing slowness and refused to meet my eyes. And in that moment, I knew. They knew. This wasn't news to them. My mother was the first to speak. "Chloe, darling," she began, her voice soft and placating, the voice she used when she wanted to manipulate me into doing something I didn't want to do. "We need you to be calm and listen." My father cleared his throat. "Your sister made a mistake, Chloe. Her husband, Mark, his business venture failed. They were going to lose everything. They were desperate." "Desperate," I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "Desperate enough to commit a felony? To ruin my life?" "Don't be so dramatic," my mother snapped, her composure cracking for a second. Then she softened again. She was always going to pay it back. It was just a temporary measure, using your good credit to get them through a rough patch. Things just didn't work out as planned. She looked at me then, her eyes pleading, and delivered the line that would echo in my head for months. "We can't let her and the children be thrown out on the street. It would be a scandal. Think of the family's reputation. You're the strong one, Chloe. You can handle this. We need you to just start making the payments until we can figure something else out. Don't report her, please. You would destroy her. You would destroy this family." They weren't asking me. They were telling me. They were telling me that my entire future, my financial security, my clean name that I had worked so hard to build, was worth less than my sister's comfort and my family's public image. I was just a resource to be tapped, a problem solver to be deployed, a human shield to protect the golden child. They saw my competence not as a virtue, but as a tool for them to exploit. Have you ever been made to feel responsible for someone else's catastrophic mistake, especially by the people who were supposed to protect you? Let me know your story in the comments below. Reading your experiences reminds me that I wasn't alone in this fight. And if you're here for justice, make sure you subscribe, because you won't want to miss how this ends. They stood there, expecting me to nod, to cry, to agree to my own financial execution. And in that moment, watching them, I did feel something break inside me. It wasn't my spirit. It was the last chain of loyalty that bound me to them. They wanted me to pay, and I decided right then and there a bill was coming due, but I wouldn't be the one paying it. To understand how they could even ask such a thing, you have to understand my family's entire operating system. It had two settings: protect Amelia and rely on Chloe. This wasn't a new crisis. It was just the Super Bowl of a game they'd been playing my entire life. Amelia was born with a sparkle, the kind of effortless charm that made people want to give her things. I was born with a sense of responsibility. From our earliest days, our roles were set. When Amelia was 7, she broke our grandmother's antique crystal vase playing ball in the house. When my parents came home, she burst into tears and pointed at me. I was the one reading quietly in the corner. I was the one who got grounded for a month, while Amelia got ice cream to calm her nerves. I didn't even fight it. I just learned the lesson. Amelia creates the mess. I handle the consequences. This pattern was reinforced at every turn. In high school, Amelia was caught cheating on a major physics exam. It was a huge scandal, and she could have been expelled. My parents went into overdrive. They hired a tutor for her, not to learn physics, but to learn how to appear remorseful to the school board. And they came to me. "Chloe, you're so good at science," my father said, putting his arm around me. "Can you just spend a few weeks coaching her? Help her pass the makeup exam. If she fails, it will ruin her college prospects." So I did. I spent every evening for 3 weeks reteaching my sister an entire semester of physics, a subject she loathed. She scraped by with a passing grade, her record was cleared, and my parents praised her for her resilience. No one ever thanked me. My contribution was simply expected. Our paths into adulthood followed the same script. I knew my parents wouldn't pay for my college, so I worked part-time jobs all through high school, saved every penny, and applied for scholarships and student loans. I put myself through nursing school, living in a cramped dorm and eating ramen noodles more times than I can count. Every loan I took out, I paid back with interest. My credit score a source of quiet pride. Amelia, on the other hand, decided she wanted the full college experience. My parents paid for her to attend an out-of-state private university where she majored in communications and minored in sorority parties. She met Mark, who came from a wealthy family, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Amelia was set. The first time my name was officially tied to her finances was about 5 years ago. She wanted a brand new luxury SUV, but her credit was a mess. She'd defaulted on 3 credit cards and had a history of late payments. Of course, my parents came to me. "She just needs a co-signer to get a good rate, honey," my mother cooed. "It's just a signature. You won't have to pay anything. Mark is covering the payments. This is just to help them get on their feet." I resisted. I told them it was a bad idea. But they wore me down. There were tearful phone calls from my mother, stern lectures from my father about family loyalty. Finally, Amelia called me, crying, saying I was the only one who could help her, that she felt like such a failure. I caved. It was the biggest mistake of my life. It gave her the blueprint. She had my social security number, my employment details, and a perfect copy of my signature from those loan documents. Looking back, the warning signs for the mortgage fraud were all there, disguised as innocent family chatter. About 2 years ago, Amelia started calling me with oddly specific questions. "Hey, Chloe, just curious, what was your first ever part-time job? We're playing a silly game." Or Mark's company is doing a profile on essential workers. Can you remind me of your exact job title and how long you've been at the hospital? I, buried in my own life and work, answered without a second thought. I remember leaving my purse at my parents' house once. My mother called me a few days later. "Honey, I'm sending your purse back, but I made a copy of your driver's license. The picture of you is just so cute, I wanted to have it." It sounded so bizarre and sentimental that I just laughed it off. Now I realize she wasn't admiring the photo. She was supplying it to a mortgage broker. After I left their house that rainy Tuesday, the real pressure campaign began. My phone became a weapon used against me. My mother would call, weeping. "How can you be so cold? Amelia is a wreck. The children are crying. Your father is so stressed, I'm worried about his heart." Then my father would get on the line, his voice low and menacing. "I am deeply disappointed in you, Chloe. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By threatening to send your sister to jail? What had they done for me?" I wanted to scream. They had raised me to be their safety net. Amelia's approach was different. She sent a barrage of texts filled with entitled rage and gaslighting. "You need to calm down. I told you I was going to pay it. You're making this a huge deal and embarrassing me. You have a good job, you can afford to help for a little while. Why do you always have to be so selfish?" Selfish. She called me selfish for not wanting to shoulder a $623,000 debt from a crime she committed. Her husband, Mark, even tried to position himself as the voice of reason, sending me a long, condescending email. "Chloe," it began, "let's approach this logically. Involving the authorities will only create a legal mess that will cost everyone money. It's better for us to handle this in-house. We are prepared to offer you a monthly payment to cover the mortgage. Let's not burn bridges over what is essentially a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. He called grand larceny a misunderstanding. They were a united front, an army of delusion, and their mission was to break me down. They thought that if they pushed hard enough, the old dynamic would kick in. That responsible, quiet Chloe would sigh, accept her fate, and start diverting her meager salary to pay for my sister's mansion. They expected me to sacrifice myself on the altar of family reputation one more time. But as I sat in my small, quiet apartment, looking at the foreclosure notice on my coffee table, I wasn't just seeing a demand for money. I was seeing my entire life laid bare. Every time I'd been overlooked, every time my achievements were minimized, and every time Amelia's failures were excused, they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a utility, an emergency fund in human form, and I realized with chilling clarity that their love was entirely conditional. It was conditioned on my willingness to be their perpetual scapegoat, and that was a condition I was no longer willing to meet. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic explosion. It was a slow, cold burn of realization that culminated in one final, unforgivable act of betrayal. For about a week, I was in a state of paralysis. I ignored their calls, their texts, their emails. I went to work, came home, and stared at the foreclosure notice, which I had placed on my fridge as a constant, ugly reminder. I was running on autopilot, my mind a storm of panic, anger, and a deep, aching grief for the family I thought I had. I felt like I was drowning, and the hands pushing me under belonged to my own parents and sister. The decision to fight back began to form late one night. I couldn't sleep, so I started doing what I do best: research. I'm a nurse. I'm trained to assess a situation, gather data, and form a plan. I spent hours online, reading about identity theft, mortgage fraud, and the legal steps required to clear my name. The more I read, the more I understood the magnitude of what Amelia had done. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a series of deliberate, calculated crimes. She would have had to falsify pay stubs, forge my signature multiple times, and lie to bank officials, notaries, and lawyers. The idea that she could do this, and that my parents knew and sanctioned it, was a level of malice I was still struggling to comprehend. The true catalyst, however, came in the mail a few days later. It was a simple, standard-sized envelope from my parents' bank. I recognized the logo instantly. I almost threw it out, assuming it was more junk mail, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a bank statement, but it wasn't for me. It was a statement for a joint savings account. The account holders listed at the top were my parents, David and Susan Miller, and my sister, Amelia Matthews. My name was nowhere on it. My eyes scanned the page, my pulse quickening. It was a high-yield savings account, the kind people use to park large sums of money. And parked in that account was a balance that made me feel dizzy, $284,000. I stared at the number, my brain struggling to connect the dots. Where did my parents get that kind of money? My father was a retired high school history teacher, and my mother had been a homemaker her whole life. They lived comfortably, but they weren't wealthy. Then I saw the transaction history. There were 2 large deposits. The first, for $150,000, was made about 18 months ago, right around the time Amelia bought her house. The second, for $134,000, was deposited just 6 months later. I sank onto my couch, the paper trembling in my hand. It was a puzzle, and the pieces were snapping into place with sickening clarity. My mind flashed back to a conversation I'd had with my parents about a year and a half ago. They had called me to tell me they were selling my grandparents' old house, the one I had spent summers in as a child, the one filled with so many happy memories. They told me the upkeep was too much, that it was time to let it go. I was sad, but I understood. I asked them what they planned to do with the money. "Oh, we'll put it aside for our retirement, honey," my mother had said breezily. "A little nest egg for our old age." A nest egg. This wasn't a nest egg. This was Amelia's slush fund. They hadn't sold my grandparents' house for their retirement. They had sold it to give the money to Amelia. But why give her the money and also have her commit mortgage fraud? It didn't make sense. And then the final devastating puzzle piece clicked into place. They hadn't given her the money for a down payment. The fraudulent loan in my name had probably covered the entire purchase price. This money, this $284,000, was something else. It was their safety net for when the whole scheme inevitably collapsed. They knew from the very beginning that Amelia wouldn't be able to make the payments. They knew it would eventually fall apart. This money wasn't for her. It was for them. It was their escape hatch. They planned to let my credit be destroyed, let me deal with the fallout and the banks, and when the dust settled, they would use this inheritance, my inheritance too, technically, to set Amelia up again somewhere else, quietly and without scandal. They hadn't just allowed her to ruin me. They had actively funded and planned for it. They had liquidated a family asset, a home that should have been a legacy for both of us, and converted it into a secret fund to ensure only one of their children would be okay. That was the moment the grief died and was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The begging, the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting. That was all just a performance. This bank statement was the truth. It was the script for their real plan. They had already written me off. They had made a calculated business decision that I was the acceptable loss. I stood up, walked over to my desk, and pulled out my laptop. I found the website for the state's top-rated consumer protection law firm. I read the profile of their lead attorney, a woman named Eleanor Vance, known for being an absolute shark when it came to financial fraud cases. Her tagline was, "We don't just level the playing field, we flip the whole board over." That night, I stopped being a victim. I decided to become a client. I typed out an email with the subject line, "Urgent, grand larceny, and mortgage fraud." I attached a scan of the foreclosure notice and a scan of the bank statement. Then I wrote the first sentence. "My name is Chloe Miller, and my family tried to sacrifice me to save themselves. I need your help to make sure they are the only ones who pay the price." Hitting send on that email was the first breath of fresh air I'd had in weeks. It was the beginning of my own declaration of war. Eleanor Vance responded to my email in less than an hour. Her reply was brief and to the point. "My office, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't speak to your family or the bank. Bring everything." Meeting her was like stepping into a different reality. Her office was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, a world away from the cluttered sentimentality of my parents' home. Eleanor herself was formidable, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. I told her everything, my voice shaking at first, then gaining strength as I laid out the decades of being the family fixer. I showed her the foreclosure notice, the texts, Mark's condescending email, and the final damning piece of evidence, the bank statement. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she steepled her fingers and looked at me for a long moment. "Chloe," she said, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel, "they didn't just commit fraud against you. They committed fraud against a federally insured financial institution. They conspired, they planned. This isn't a family squabble. This is a criminal enterprise, and we are going to treat it as such." That meeting changed everything. For the first time, I wasn't alone. I had an ally, and not just any ally, but a powerful, brilliant woman who saw the injustice as clearly as I did. The first thing Eleanor did was take control of all communication. She had me forward every text and email from my family to her, and I blocked their numbers. The silence was bliss. It was like a constant, buzzing alarm had finally been switched off. While my family was likely panicking over my sudden radio silence, assuming I was cracking under the pressure, we were building a fortress. Our strategy had two fronts. The first was defensive, protecting me. Eleanor's team immediately contacted the mortgage company's fraud department. They filed an official identity theft report with the police, creating a paper trail that proved I was the victim, not the debtor. They placed fraud alerts on my credit with all three major bureaus and began the painstaking process of disputing the fraudulent loan. Eleanor explained that this would be a long, arduous process, but it was essential to clear my name. She also drafted a cease and desist letter that was so aggressive it could have peeled paint, warning my parents, Amelia and Mark, that any further contact with me would be considered witness intimidation and harassment. The second front was offensive, building our case. This is where my nursing skills came in handy in a way I never expected. I'm meticulous with details and patient with complex systems. Eleanor called me her star witness and lead investigator. Under her guidance, I started assembling a timeline of deceit. I dug up old emails, bank statements, and even social media posts. I found the online listing for my grandparents' house, which confirmed the sale date perfectly aligned with the first huge deposit into my parents' secret account. I remembered Amelia posting photos on Instagram from a lavish trip to Italy just after the second deposit was made. The caption read, "Feeling so blessed. Daddy's little girl always gets what she wants." I saved a screenshot. It was a small, petty detail, but Eleanor loved it. "Juries hate entitlement," she said with a thin smile. The most crucial piece of evidence came from a stroke of luck. While going through old boxes of paperwork, I found the documents from when I co-signed the loan for Amelia's SUV years ago. Stapled to the back was a copy of the application she had filled out. It contained my social security number, my employment information, and a clear example of her forging my signature. When I showed it to Eleanor, she practically glowed. "This is the Rosetta Stone," she whispered. "This proves she had prior access to your information and a history of using it for financial gain with your parents' knowledge. It establishes a pattern of behavior." While all this was happening in the background, I played the part my family expected me to play, the weak, overwhelmed victim. I needed them to believe they still had the upper hand. On Eleanor's advice, I unblocked my mother's number for one carefully orchestrated phone call. She called almost immediately. "Chloe, thank God. We've been so worried. Have you come to your senses? We need to talk about a payment plan for the bank." I took a deep breath and delivered the performance of a lifetime. I cried. I told her I was scared and didn't know what to do. I told her I couldn't afford a lawyer and that the bank was terrifying me. "I just don't want Amelia to get in trouble," I sniffled. "I just need some time to figure out how to get the money." It worked perfectly. My mother's tone shifted from panicked to patronizing. "Oh, honey, of course. You're doing the right thing. You're a good sister. Your father and I are so proud of you for seeing reason. We'll help you figure it out. We're all in this together." The hypocrisy was so thick I could have choked on it. She thought she was calming me down, manipulating me back into the fold. In reality, she was confirming their conspiracy on a recorded line. a recording Eleanor now had. They thought I was silently falling apart. In truth, I was silently rising, gathering my weapons, and preparing for a confrontation they couldn't possibly imagine. They were planning a family meeting to help me budget for my new crippling debt. They had no idea they were walking into a legal ambush. The setting for the confrontation was my parents' dining room, the stage for so many of my childhood humiliations. My mother had insisted on a family summit to support me. They were all there, my mother, looking concerned in a cashmere sweater, my father, looking stern and judicial at the head of the table, and Amelia and Mark sitting side by side, radiating an aura of smug condescension. They had a laptop open on the table, along with a stack of papers. They were ready to present me with their plan for my financial ruin. I walked in, and for the first time in my life in that room, I didn't feel small. I felt like a predator. "Chloe, thank you for coming," my father began in his deep, authoritative voice. "We know this has been stressful, but we've worked out a solution that is best for everyone." Mark slid the laptop toward me. On the screen was a detailed budget spreadsheet. It had my monthly salary at the top, and then a long list of expenses: my rent, my utilities, my student loan payments. And then a new line item, family support contribution, with the monthly mortgage payment for Amelia's mansion listed next to it. According to their calculations, if I gave up my car, canceled my health insurance, and ate nothing but rice and beans, I could just barely cover it. "We figure you can move back in here to save on rent," my mother added, as if offering a great kindness. "It will be just like old times." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I looked at each of them, at their expectant, self-satisfied faces. Then I smiled. It wasn't my usual accommodating smile. It was the smile Eleanor had practiced with me in her office, a smile with teeth. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the room like a stone. My father frowned. "No? What do you mean, no?" "Chloe, this isn't a negotiation." "Oh, I know," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It's a crime scene, and I'm not the debtor here. I'm the primary victim and the star witness." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick file folder, placing it on the table with a satisfying thud. It was a copy of the case file Eleanor and I had been building. I opened it. "Let's start with the crime itself," I began, my voice as calm and clinical as if I were reading a patient's chart. "Mortgage fraud, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft. Those are just the top-line charges. Amelia, when you forged my signature on federal banking documents that carried a potential sentence of up to 30 years in prison, per document." Amelia's face went white. Mark started to speak, but I held up a hand. "I'm not done. Let's talk about conspiracy. Dad, Mom, when you actively encouraged and enabled this crime, you became co-conspirators. That carries the same sentence." I slid the first document across the table. It was a copy of the SUV loan application, with Amelia's forged signature next to my real one. "This is Exhibit A. It establishes a pattern of fraud you were all aware of years ago." Next, I slid out a copy of the screenshot from Amelia's Italy trip. Exhibit B. Spending lavishly while the fraudulent loan in my name was already delinquent. Then came the pièce de résistance. I took out the copy of their secret joint bank statement and placed it directly in front of my father. "And this is Exhibit C, the $284,000 you laundered from the sale of Grandma's house, the house that was supposed to be part of my inheritance, too. This isn't a retirement fund, it's a getaway fund, for when this all came crashing down on me." My father stared at the statement as if it were a snake. My mother began to tremble, her face a mask of disbelief. How did you get that?" she stammered. "Does it matter?" I asked coolly. "It proves you never intended to help. You intended to discard me. You sold a family legacy to finance your golden child's escape after she'd ruined my life. You made a choice, her over me." Amelia finally found her voice, a high-pitched shriek. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't do that to your own sister. You'd be destroying the family." "You already did that," I said, my voice dropping. "You did it when you decided my future was a fair price to pay for your mansion. Mom, Dad, you did it every time you chose her comfort over my well-being. This family, the one you keep talking about protecting, it was a sham. It was a system designed to serve one person at the expense of another. And I'm done being the expense. Mark, ever the strategist, tried a new tactic. Okay, Chloe, what do you want? Is this about money? We can arrange something. I laughed. It was a genuine, liberating laugh. Oh, Mark, this stopped being about money a long time ago. This is about justice. You all seem to have forgotten who I am. I'm the responsible one, remember? The one who follows the rules, the one who cleans up the messes. Well, this is the biggest mess of all, and I'm going to clean it up the only way I know how. Properly, thoroughly, and by the book. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. You had a choice. You could have come to me honestly. You could have been a family, but you chose to be criminals. So now, you'll be treated like criminals. I looked directly at my sister. The police have been notified. My lawyer, Eleanor Vance, you'll be hearing from her, has already spoken with the U.S. Attorney's Office. They are very interested in your story, especially the part about the secret bank account. My mother let out a small sob. My father looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Amelia was just staring at me, her mouth hanging open, the reality of the situation finally dawning on her. You have two options, I said, walking toward the door. You can use that $284,000 to hire the best defense attorneys you can find. Or you can use it to pay back the bank for the fraudulent loan taken out in my name. Either way, that money is gone, and so am I. I paused at the door and looked back at them, this group of people who were now strangers to me. By the way, I added, I moved back in with you to save money. That's a great idea, just not for me. You're all going to need a place to live after the bank forecloses on this house and on Amelia's mansion. I walked out the door and didn't look back. The air outside had never smelled so sweet. If watching that tables turn brought a smile to your face, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories of empowerment and justice matter. The aftermath was not a sudden explosion, but a controlled demolition. Just as Eleanor predicted, once faced with undeniable evidence and the very real threat of federal prosecution, my family's united front crumbled into dust. Their panic was palpable. Eleanor's office was flooded with calls from 3 different high-priced lawyers they had hired with the money from their secret account. The arrogant, condescending tone was gone, replaced by a desperate scramble for damage control. Faced with a mountain of evidence, the forged signatures, the fraudulent pay stubs Amelia had created, the recorded phone call, and the damning bank statement showing conspiracy, they had no choice but to cooperate. The U.S. Attorney's Office, eager to make an example of suburban white-collar crime, offered them a deal, and Eleanor advised me it was the best path forward. It wasn't about vengeance for me, it was about restitution and consequences. Amelia, as the primary perpetrator, pleaded guilty to 1 count of bank fraud. To avoid jail time, she was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and, most importantly, full financial restitution. My parents, as co-conspirators, had to plead guilty to lesser charges. Their punishment was largely financial. The court seized the entire $284,000 from their joint account. That money went directly to the mortgage company to pay down a significant chunk of the fraudulent loan. They were also fined heavily and given 2 years of probation. Mark, who had tried to play the innocent, well-meaning husband, got tangled up in the investigation. It turned out he had knowingly provided false information about Amelia's employment at his failing business for the loan application. He was charged with making false statements to a financial institution, which ended up destroying what was left of his business reputation. The consequences rippled through their perfect lives like a shockwave. Amelia and Mark couldn't afford the payments on their mansion, not with their slush fund gone and Mark's business in ruins. The bank foreclosed, and the big house in Northwood Heights with the perfect lawn was sold at auction. They had to downsize to a small rental apartment in a town they used to look down on. The scandal became the gossip of their social circle, and the friends who once admired their lifestyle now avoided them. The shame was a public punishment far worse than any court sentence. My parents had to sell their house, the house I grew up in, to pay their legal fees and the court-ordered fines. The home that was once a symbol of their comfortable, respectable life was gone. They ended up moving into a small condo for seniors, their retirement dreams replaced by the stark reality of their choices. For me, the resolution was a quiet, profound sense of release. With the signed confession from Amelia and the official court records, Eleanor's team was able to get the fraudulent loan completely removed from my name and my credit history fully restored. It was a long, bureaucratic fight, but a few months later, I received a letter from all 3 credit bureaus confirming that the trade line had been deleted. Holding that clean report in my hand felt like taking my first true breath of freedom. The weight of that $623,000, a burden I was never meant to carry, was finally lifted. I am no longer in contact with any of them. There were a few desperate, pleading voicemails at first, but I never listened to them. I changed my number. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city. I cut the final ties, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I had spent 32 years in a cage with the door wide open, conditioned to believe I couldn't leave. Walking away was the ultimate act of taking back control. My life is simpler now, but it's entirely my own. My small apartment feels like a palace because every inch of it is earned and uncompromised. I go to work, I take care of my patients, and I come home to a peace that is absolute. There is no more waiting for the other shoe to drop, no more managing someone else's crisis. There is just me, and for the first time, that feels like more than enough. Looking back on this whole nightmare, I've learned that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones other people tell you. They're the ones you tell yourself. For years, I told myself that being the responsible one was my identity, my value. I told myself that if I just kept fixing things, kept absorbing the blows, one day they would finally see me, appreciate me. I thought that was love. It wasn't. It was a role I was playing in their story, and I finally realized I deserved to be the lead in my own. The hardest part wasn't cutting them off. It was grieving the family I never really had. I had to mourn the idea of a mother who would protect me, a father who would be proud of me, and a sister who would be my friend. That grief was real, and it was painful. But on the other side of that pain is a clarity I wouldn't trade for anything. I learned that true strength isn't about how much you can endure for others. It's about having the courage to set boundaries and enforce them, even if it means walking away from everything you've ever known. My life isn't glamorous. I don't have a mansion or fancy cars, but what I have is real. I have integrity. I have self-respect. I have peace. Sometimes, when I'm finishing a long shift at the hospital, I think about my old life and my new one. I used to come home exhausted from my job, only to face the second shift of managing my family's drama. Now, I come home exhausted, and I get to recharge. I get to invest my energy into my own life, my own friendships, my own future. I'm even thinking about going back to school to become a nurse practitioner. For the first time, my future is a blank page that only I get to write on. This experience taught me that you can't build your house on a faulty foundation. My family was my foundation, and it was rotten to the core. I had to tear it all down to build something new, something just for me. It was the hardest and best decision I've ever made. I chose myself, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to choose between your own well-being and a toxic family dynamic, know that you are not alone and your strength is incredible. Share your own stories of choosing yourself in the comments. Your journey could be the sign someone else needs to start their own. And please, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth, justice, and taking back your power.